multiplier of the day is user review scores, not critic review scores, user reviews, because users actually matter. So, if you have a game and you've got mostly negative or mixed reviews, people are going to be less likely to buy your game. I have seen user reviews, they're not just a multiplier, they're like a divider. I've seen many scenarios where there's a game that comes out that's got hundreds of thousands of wish lists, it's got tons of hype, YouTubers cover it like crazy, press covers it like crazy, and you'll see the player counts, the CCU going up and up and up, and then half an hour into launch, an hour into launch, when all the reviews become public on Steam, and it comes out as like a mixed or like negative or something like that, immediately the CCU starts dropping. It will kneecap your launch if you've got bad or mixed reviews. We're talking like, you're going to make like 10 or 20% of what you could make if you've just got like positive or very positive reviews. And getting those decent review scores is not that difficult if you know why people write negative reviews. And that's about it, right? So I'm going to go over the reasons why people write negative reviews. And if you just apply all of these things, you can almost guarantee that you will have positive reviews, or at the very least positive, and it's not too difficult to get very positive reviews either. So then the other thing that I kind of briefly mentioned, this does not apply to critic reviews. I don't get good critic reviews, but it also hasn't really negatively affected me in any super significant way. It seems like user reviews are the main thing that matters. Obviously, yes, if you're getting 10 out of 10s from IGN and all the different news sites, that will probably be a good thing, and it'll probably convince some people to buy it. But in general, most people don't really trust the critic sites anyways. A lot of people think that they're rigged. A lot of people just don't trust the reviewers. They think people are biased. Most people don't care about the critic reviews. And from my experience, it seems pretty difficult to please the critics. Like, you're going to have to double your game's budget and double the development time if you want to actually get those really good critic reviews. So I just don't worry about it. My focus is on the players. I think that's what makes the most sense to prioritize. So the two reasons that people will negatively review a game is if it's not what they expected it to be, or if they are not able to play it effectively. Okay, so if it's not, well, we'll go over the simplest one first. If the game isn't what they're expecting it to be. If you are advertising your game in a way that is not super representative of the actual gameplay, people are going to get pissed. All right? They're going to buy something thinking it's one thing. Turns out it's the other. They're going to get pissed. They're going to write a negative review, and then they'll refund it. Some examples, I've seen games, I don't want to call out specific ones, but I'll lay out the examples. There was one game, it was so hyped up. It was hyped up for probably 7 years. So many wish lists. It came out on launch, tons of YouTuber coverage, but the way that it was marketed was almost more as sort of like a strategic, gritty sort of shooter game. And when it came out, it was more of a walking simulator. And the combat that was in the forefront of a lot of the gameplay, it just didn't really exist. There really wasn't any of it. So it was a big mismatch in audience expectation, and it got really bad reviews. Again, CCU was going up, reviews came out, immediately tanks. Okay, and then the second reason is the more full list that I'm going to go through here, and that is people not being able to play the game effectively. So if somebody hops into a game and there are no graphics settings, so they can reduce the settings and make it actually run well on their computer, right? If you've got optimization issues that are preventing people from effectively playing the game, they're gonna be pissed. They just paid for something and they can't even play it, right? They're getting 20 FPS on this game. That's a problem. Accessibility settings, being able to, invert the X and Y for your camera looking around. Stuff like that. People are going to write negative reviews if you don't have these things. So I'm just going to go through the list here of all the things that I see most commonly complained about in negative reviews, both on my own games and on other people's games, and how bro, my games aren't technical masterpieces, but I'm giving people what they expected, and I'm giving it to them in a way that they can effectively play it, right? Nobody's going to sit there and say Choo Choo Charles is a technical masterpiece, because it's not. But I'm giving people what they asked for. So, first thing, accessibility settings. Every single game needs to have accessibility settings. This means things like key rebinding. Okay, every single key that you're WASD to move. I see some of these games. You guys are releasing games where you use the arrow keys to move. What are you doing? We need to be able to rebind that, because most people, they're going to want to use WASD. But some people, they can't use WASD. They want to use something else, right? There's people in different parts of the world using different types of keyboards. If you do not have key rebinding, you are going to get negative reviews. Next one, invert X and Y. You need to have this. You need to have a setting where you can enable invert Y. You need to have a setting where you can invert X, both individually, okay? And guys, if you don't know what any of these things are, also, just look it up, okay? Anyways, look sensitivity. You need to be able to have a multiplier slider where you can set how much the camera is moving based on how much you're moving your mouse. That's incredibly important. Gamma and brightness. This is especially one for horror games. You know, depending on the type of monitor that people are playing on, depending on what type of lighting they have in their gaming room, you need to have brightness settings so that everybody can actually see what's going on in your game. If your game is too dark and there's no way to change it, that's going to be annoying. There's also some people who they just don't like games that are overly dark, right? Like, yeah, it's a horror game. Ooh, dark is scary. It's not. But you got to give people the option to play it in the way that they want to play it. Okay, another one, camera shake. This should either be a checkbox or a multiplier slider. I like doing a multiplier slider. But if you just had a checkbox, that would be fine too. The camera shake and camera bob and all of that stuff in your game, a lot of people are just going to find it nauseating. And depending on the game, like if you're designing your camera shake really poorly, it could be really, really bad. Regardless, no matter what, it's not just about like, oh, I'll just design it better. I'll just like tone it down a little bit. No, give people a slider. Give people the option to disable it entirely. You might be thinking, oh, but then it'll look so bad. That doesn't matter. If somebody wants to play it with camera shake turned off, let them play it with camera shake turned off. Next one, FOV. You should be able to change the FOV. This isn't the most important one that I've ever seen. I haven't seen a lot of negative reviews about this, but you might as well include it. Okay, the window mode and screen resolution. This is an important one. Sometimes you'll have a game where it'll just boot up in full screen and you just can't change it. This is especially a problem with people who have like multi-monitor setups. It might boot up in full screen on their side monitor instead of their main monitor, and if they can't change it into windowed mode, drag it over, and then make it full screen again, it's going to be annoying. And I think that there's like other ways through Windows that you can like change it, like just through the OS, but like, again, just make it a setting in the game, make it simple, make it easy. People expect these kind of settings out of any competent game anyways. Another one, VSync. Add some VSync. Also, I should mention, if you're using Unreal Engine, all of these are really, really easy to add. I don't know about other engines, but just something to mention. I don't know. Maybe in some engines, these are really difficult. But in Unreal, you can do all these really, really easily. So do them. But yeah, VSync, have a VSync option. FPS capping, should also have FPS caps. Just go for caps at all of the, I would say the key, like the most popular monitor refresh rates. You know, you get your 30, 60, 144, maybe 120, and on up to, you know, unlimited as well. Sound mixer, you should have sound, again, either sliders or checkboxes. Sliders would be ideal because it gives people more options. You should have sliders for the music in your game, for the voice acting in your game, and then for everything else. Those are the three key categories that I would say. So voices, music, and everything else. And you should also have the option to enable or disable subtitles. I think it's good to just have subtitles enabled by default, but then also giving people the option to disable them. Okay, that's the first point, accessibility. Second thing, constant sense of direction. Now, we've kind of talked about stuff similar to this in other videos, but people need a constant sense of direction. They need a constant sense of progress. Don't be afraid to tell people what to do. You know, as gamers will say all the time, oh, I don't like games that are holding my hand. They do. Uh, what you need to do is hold players' hands without them knowing that they have their hand being held. You need to guide people without them realizing that they're being guided. This kind of just gets into, generally just into good game design practice. So watch a bunch of videos about game design. Watch some old GDC talks about it. Read some books. But making sure people always know what they need to do and where they need to go. You know, you can give people waypoints, give people mission logs, little reminders. Don't throw too many things at players at once. Don't tell them, you need to go here and here and here and here and here. And like give them like a mission log full of like 10 different things to do. Like give them a couple things at a time. 1 or 2 options in any given scenario. If you give them one option, that's good because then they have direction. If you give them if you give them 2 options, then they feel like they have agency and control. You're really only giving them 2 options. It's not that deep, but you give that, it's extra points because it feels like they're making a choice. Okay, next thing that you're going to get negative reviews about. You need a satisfying beginning and a satisfying ending to your game. The first and last 5 minutes of your game are the most important because that's what people are going to remember. When they first boot up, so I'll get into another kind of concept real quick here that kind of ties into this. So I think it was like movie companies were trying to figure out how to get better reviews for their movies. And so in one test group, they told the people who were going to watch this movie, they told them that it was reviewed like a 9 out of 10. And then they watched the movie and they asked those people, what did you think of it? And those people tended to rate the movie closer to that 9 out of 10. And then they had another group of people that they told, hey, this movie was rated a 5 out of 10 or whatever it was. And then after those people watched the movie, they had them rate it, and it was rated much closer to that 5 out of 10. So people's initial perception of a game or a product or anything is going to affect their final analysis of it. They're not aware of it. It's completely biased, but that's how it works. And so in one way, so this ties in a couple ways. First of all, having a good user review score is going to ensure that you continue getting good user reviews. But also, if people start playing a game and it starts out good, they're going to assume that the rest of the game is also good. It acts as that early review, that good early review. And so you can have a really good start, a really good end, and even if the middle is a little bit so-so at times, it's kind of slow, there are times where it's not really that interesting, that kind of, it becomes sort of a blur. What really matters is that beginning and end. And the reason that the beginning end matters so much is because you're setting up the expectation for the rest, and the ending is the most important because it's the last thing that people are left with, right? So people finish the game and they're like, wow, that was so cool, that was so hyped, that was a great boss fight, oh, that credit sequence was so cool, oh, those final few missions were so good, those were so satisfying. That's where you should put a lot of your effort. Okay, next thing, optimization. Your game needs to run well. It needs to run well. A lot of people, they're like, oh, but I want to enable all these settings because then it looks better. It doesn't matter how pretty it is if people can't play it, okay? This is also where, you need to, at the very least, have some graphic settings so that people can, turn off shadows, turn off ambient occlusion, turn off whatever to help it run better on their system. But also, just at a base level, you should try and keep things fairly optimized so that it's playable across most systems. Okay, motion blur. Here's another one, guys. All right. This is kind of a funny one. So like Unreal Engine, for example, by default, it has motion blur enabled. Turn that shit off. Get rid of it. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. Everybody hates motion blur in games. When I first started making games, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, motion blur. Yeah, that's cool. It makes it like more realistic and stuff. And then I would get negative reviews like, oh my gosh, there's no setting to disable the motion blur. This is awful. And so I was like, that's interesting. So I started disabling motion blur by default, but adding an option to enable or disable motion blur. And that fixed those complaints. And then I started, like I think Choo Choo Charles and some of my smaller free like Game Jam games, those were the first games where I just turned off motion blur entirely and didn't even give people an option. I have never once, out of the thousands and thousands of reviews that I've gotten, I have never had somebody say, boy, this game was great, but I sure would love it if there was motion blur. I wish there was an option to enable motion blur. Everybody hates it. Just keep it off. One other little thing on this note actually is you can use motion blur in cutscenes. In cutscenes, it's fine because, again, I mean, you could even have your... Actually, don't do this. But I was going to say you could even have your cutscenes run at like 24 FPS and people probably wouldn't even notice. But they probably would. But you can have motion blur enabled in cutscenes, and that'll feel more natural. But if the player is in control of the camera, motion blur, it just feels awful. Stamina bars and player speed. This one, man, there are a lot of games that just add stamina bars for no reason. Oftentimes, I think it's just to like pad out the playtime. Because the developer's like, if people are fast all the time, then they'll complete this game in 30 minutes. It's like, all right, well then, so what? That's fine. It would be better for people to complete your game 20% faster, because they can just run whenever they want, than for them to, play this game that feels all padded out and feels really slow because there's a stamina bar. It's just annoying. I see complaints about stamina bars all the time in games. And I got to a point where, again, like for Choo Choo Charles, there's no stamina bar. It would be pointless. In some games, in some contexts, having a stamina bar can make sense from a gameplay perspective. But most of the time when indie games are adding these things, they're just blindly doing that. They're like, oh, I saw other games that had a stamina bar, so I guess I'll do it too. Don't do that. The reason that games like, I don't know, I don't even know what games have a stamina bar. Maybe Dark Souls. It would make sense for like Dark Souls to have a stamina bar because it's part of that intricate combat gameplay of like using it as a resource. Last one, ultra-wide support or just support for different aspect ratios. Ideally, your UI should be able to be rescaled without getting all messed up. A lot of people play on ultra-wide monitors. You should have UI that fits on an ultra-wide monitor. Same thing with any other common aspect ratio. Okay, and the last big thing is user testing. I don't think it's possible to release a game that gets awful reviews if you do plenty of user testing and you take the user feedback very seriously and actually implement changes. I'm not saying, and this one thing that we need to be very clear on is that when I say take their input seriously, I don't mean when a player says, I don't really like this weapon. I think you should, or if they said like, oh, the game is boring, you should add like twice as much content. Probably shouldn't do that, right? Oftentimes, players, they can identify problems, but they're very bad at identifying solutions. Look at the problem they're having, and then come up with your own solution that actually makes sense in the perspective of like having to develop a game, right? Players are going to suggest all kinds of crazy things, not knowing, oh, that's going to cost a ton of money. That's going to take months of development time. That's just not possible with how the framework for everything is set up. So they're going to make suggestions that suck. So don't listen to the actual like solutions that they're proposing. Listen to the problems that they're having, right? If the problem is that the game is boring, it's like, okay, are we rewarding players enough? Are we giving people level ups often enough? Are we giving people, do we just need to change the pacing? Are the cutscenes and the expo dumps too long? Try and get to the root of the problem so that you can come up with an intelligent solution. And if you do enough of that and you allow the game time to, develop and improve, and you do more user testing and you get to the point where people are generally enjoying it and not really having any major issues, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to release a game that has competent reviews. That's it.